For a certain kind of person, Matt Christman needs no introduction. But maybe you're not the dirtbag leftist I am, so I guess it's still my job to give you the introduction. Matt is co-host of the enormously popular Chapo Trap House. It is a hilarious, profane, and super online left-wing podcast. But Matt seems to be going through something. Maybe it's a kind of midlife crisis, because on the show and on his Twitch streams, he's been going on and on about how our politics is just pure spectacle, like this whole GameStop thing. Ordinary people just seem so utterly powerless. They can't change the material conditions of this society, so posting is all they got. But as the notifications incessantly ring, Matt is doing this really introspective poster's lament. And I think we should all listen to it. Regardless of where we fall on the ideological spectrum, we should ask ourselves, what are we really doing here? Whether it's your Twitter, the subreddit, or the academic journal that you publish in, this capital D discourse, is it really politics?
I never really felt like I was doing real politics, I guess you could say. I always tried to stress that to myself, and then once Chapo started, to people listening, that posting isn't politics, and that listening to a podcast isn't politics, that entertainment consumption is not politics. But at the same time, if you feel like there's no real avenue to do politics, that thought you might have at the top of your head to reassure you that you're not wasting your time, it very well might be masking a deeper desire to see the easiest way out of that paradox, which is to fantasize your way into thinking that you are doing politics with your posts. And I guess eventually got to a point where it was no longer sustainable. And so I had to take apart my whole posting ethos and look at it piece by piece to see what was driving the whole thing.
What examples of like kind of posting politics stand out for you as the sort of most spectacular and devoid from sort of actual political agency?
I mean, all of it. I don't know if you can really say any of it is more or less. I mean, the delusion, the emotional weight that you give it might vary, and that might make the distance between what you're doing and what you think you're doing greater or less. But the actual acts are, I think, equally meaningless. I mean, it's all a subjective delusion.
What do you make of the whole GameStop story?
It's what we give instead of politics. It's people coming together in what feels in the moment like solidarity, that feels in the moment like a challenge to power, but which is fully structured by atomization and by the profit motive. I mean, the engine of all of the GameStop thing was not a concerted desire to see Wall Street brought down. It was the individual desire of people online to make money at the expense of people who deserve to have the money taken from them, certainly. But that could never substitute for a truly egalitarian politics that's rooted in solidarity. But because that's not a thing that people have any experience with in their lives, it's to be expected that they will not be able to necessarily distinguish these things. And considering also how grim the situation looks and how limited the political avenues are, there's a huge incentive to want to make all of these things more transgressive, more subversive, more threatening to power than they actually are.
Why do you think that is?
Because people want to feel that there's hope. People want to feel that there are avenues for change. And the best way to feel that is to see examples of it in the world. And since the way we view the world is largely through the mediated prism of online, what happens there is going to get a lot of our emotional attention. And we're going to be incentivized significantly to see what maybe isn't there just so that we can keep going. Or if we're a member of the takeocracy, so that we can maintain a narrative of progress that we can imagine that we're part of and that our audience is a part of.
Is there any way to like harness that kind of energy and then harness it into something that's like actually egalitarian and politically like efficacious, or ought we just sort of reject those kind of posting online impulses completely and sort of ground ourselves in something different.
I don't think it's realistic to tell anybody to stop posting, considering how constitutive that is of our lives at this point. My real belief is that the politics that have to be reborn to replace the dead politics of the moment are going to be reborn in struggle, in daily life. And that will involve the internet, because the internet is how many of us view the world outside of our immediate sphere, which means that even in our own cities, we're likely only to encounter news of changing circumstances or events through engagement with the internet. But if it's going to turn into anything, if we're going to build a politics to replace the dead ones, then the internet will be instrumental to that only as a way to link people to each other in real life. And the thing to avoid while waiting for that moment to happen, while waiting to see the shoots around you, is to not necessarily get offline, because as I said, that's asking a lot, but to realign your emotional relationship to the discourse around abstract questions that I truly believe cannot be part of any meaningful politics. It's in fact the opposite of that.
Abstract questions like what? Like how to deal with like identity politics and sort of class-based politics on the left, or like all these sort of insular kind of ideological debates. Is that what you mean? What exactly do you mean by
any question that assumes a movement, like a coherent left, to execute a policy based on the resolution of those questions is by definition beside the point, because no such mechanism, no such organization exists.
Right. It makes total sense. There's mountains of like academic research that points to the fact that like ordinary people have such little influence in actual policy decisions. So that gap is so wide.
Yeah.
I'm curious to what that might look like for you personally, like just from where I'm coming from. Like, I wish I was more of a sort of engaged activist, part of actual movements that were pushing politics, maybe at a local level or the institutions that I'm part of. But I don't do it, probably because I'm selfish, because it takes, real costs and doesn't get the kind of attention that, posting can. How do you think that you're going to navigate that? Where do you think your politics are going to go?
I mean, I don't know. I'm in the process of sort of winnowing down what I think my contribution to the media ecosystem can be that is positive, that contributes more light than heat. And it's much less about questions of the political process, electoral politics, or even theoretical politics as much as it is history, and also sort of the sociological and psychological terrain that compel us to reify this spectacle politics instead of doing the work around us. What that means for me politically is that I don't know, because I am at the moment very cut off from anything around me, as many of us are. The urge I have to be a politically efficacious person, to live a politics that is emancipatory for me and everyone else, is very much limited. And so what I have instead is time to refine my emotional response, the clarity of my own vision, so that when I am able to interact with the world, I can do it with a clarity that will allow me to act from my best instincts and not my worst ones.
I got the sense too, like listening to the show, as part of the Bernie campaign, that there was like an enthusiasm, like when you folks like actually sort of went door to door, that was kind of infectious. I'm wondering if that is sort of part of this story. Like, is it kind of a post-Bernie letdown that is kind of leading you to this point? How do you figure that into this story?
When we were in knocking doors for Bernie in the primaries, I mean, I felt something I never felt before. And what it was I thought I was going to be able to have my cake and eat it too. I thought I was going to be able to continue to do a job that was fun and easy and pleasurable and non-alienated, and also make the world a better place. Also contribute to a political shift that will make the lives of Americans and people around the world materially better. And who wouldn't want to believe that? I think that belief powered a lot of people into the Bernie campaign, and they did their best. I believe that the majority of people who worked with the Bernie campaign were operating out of a genuine desire to help, but also a belief that it could be this easy. I mean, obviously it wasn't easy, but it certainly would have been easier than what we're going to have to do. And it was the failure of that campaign that really made me and a lot of other people have to come to terms with the reality of the struggle that we're having to deal with. Because, I mean, for myself, I never really had any illusions that Bernie was going to, by himself, by being elected, bring about even social democracy, let alone socialism. Just that his presidency could sharpen the underlying class conflict that is masked by our spectacular politics and create new formations of mobilization to press against capitalism.
I'm curious about the show and where you think it will go, given this space and this kind of realization of yours in terms of the limits of posting. What do you want it to be, given that realization of yours?
My hope, and and everyone is on the same page right now on this, is that we are all in agreement that politics is not really here right now. And that we have to wean ourselves off of the commentary that we were doing and the cheap psychological heat that we were able to generate by triangulating off of the news of the week. And as much as we do have a desire to consistently undermine the presentation of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party as any sort of champions for anyone other than the most monstrous elites of this country, that we have to broaden our approach away from politics as such to culture, to history, things we've always done. But I think the current stalemate insists upon us doing that even more than we had. So that's, I think, what we're all looking to do.
There's a sense in which I've been sort of as on board with your takes recently, but a little bit depressed by them because of the kind of powerlessness that you sometimes kind of insist, if you know what I mean. And not to get sort of self-righteous about it, because I'm by no means like involved in sort of all of these activist struggles. I'm not in the labor movement or the anti-war movement or, you know, kind of the old school left. But I do sometimes like interview these people and they aren't as sort of despondent about the spectacularization of our kind of post-Bernie politics as I kind of get from you. I'm wondering if that might just be a direction, like kind of old school activist struggles in some sense or another. Like I'm certainly not joining them because of my own selfishness, but I feel like if I could, the powerlessness, we might not be so powerless if we join together.
Yeah. No, that people take my opinions here as depressing because it means if you take it seriously, what I'm saying, you're not allowed to pretend anymore that you are a political agent. And that means that if you want to be one, you have to risk, you have to suffer. And that people don't want to do that. If they do, I think they will very likely find that it's not nearly as depressing as they think about. And in fact, what seemed depressing is actually like the first step towards articulating an authentic self, maybe for the first time in our lives.
That was Matt Christman, co-host of the podcast